The knock came at 6:30 a.m. Jack Bennet fumbled with his coffee mug, nearly spilling it across the stack of unpaid bills on his kitchen counter. Nobody ever came by this early, especially not on a Saturday. Through the peephole, he saw her, Elise Harrington, the intimidating CEO of Meridian Publishing, standing on his doorstep in a tailored blazer that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The same woman who, just 12 hours ago, had interviewed him for a senior editor position he desperately needed. The same woman who now held a familiar leather portfolio in her manicured hands. What could she possibly want? And why did she look so different outside the confines of her corner office? "Mr. Bennet," she said when he opened the door, her voice crisp as autumn air. "You forgot something last night." Jack's heart plummeted. Had he made some catastrophic mistake during the interview? Was she here to tell him personally that he'd failed? With his 5-year-old daughter still asleep upstairs and 3 months of overdue mortgage payments hanging over his head, this job wasn't just a career move, it was survival. The first time Jack met Elise Harrington, she'd been a force of nature behind an imposing mahogany desk, her long platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, her ice-blue eyes scanning his resume with surgical precision. Her questions had been relentless, her standards clearly astronomical. Now, standing on his porch with the morning light softening her features, she looked almost human. "May I come in?" she asked, not really waiting for an answer as she stepped past him into his modest living room, where toys were scattered across the floor and last night's dinner dishes still sat on the coffee table. Jack felt his face burn with embarrassment. This wasn't how he wanted the CEO of his potential employer to see him, disheveled, disorganized, clearly struggling. "I apologize for the mess," he stammered. "My daughter Emma and I were." "Daddy?" A small voice called from the staircase. Emma stood there in her unicorn pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Who's the pretty lady?" Elise Harrington turned, and something in her expression shifted. For a moment, the corporate mask slipped, revealing something softer underneath. "Hello there," she said, her voice gentler than Jack had thought possible. "I'm Elise. I work with your dad." "Not yet," Jack corrected automatically, then winced. "I mean..." "Actually," Elise interrupted, turning back to him with an unreadable expression, "that's why I'm here." She handed him the portfolio. "You left this behind after your interview. When I opened it to find your contact information, I discovered something interesting." Jack's stomach twisted. Inside that portfolio wasn't just his resume and credentials, but the children's book manuscript he'd been working on for years, a story he'd written for Emma after her mother walked out on them. A story about loss, resilience, and finding magic in everyday life. A story he'd never intended to share with anyone, let alone the intimidating CEO of the publishing company he was desperate to work for. "Mr. Bennet," Elise said, her voice suddenly businesslike again, "I'd like to discuss 2 opportunities with you. One is the editing position you interviewed for yesterday. The other..." She paused, her eyes meeting his with unexpected intensity. "The other is about this manuscript." What happened next would change everything for Jack and Emma Bennet. But neither of them could have predicted how Elise Harrington would transform their lives, or how they would transform hers. 3 weeks later, Jack still couldn't believe he was sitting in Elise Harrington's office, watching her pace back and forth as she dictated notes about his manuscript. "The protagonist needs more agency in Chapter 3, she said, gesturing emphatically. "And the magical elements should be introduced earlier. Readers need to understand the rules of your world." Jack nodded, making notes. Working directly with the CEO on his children's book wasn't part of his job description as Meridian's newest senior editor, but Elise had insisted. "It's exceptional," she'd told him that morning in his living room. "Raw, but with tremendous potential." "Why are you doing this?" he asked now, the question escaping before he could stop it. Elise paused her pacing, her expression guarded. "Doing what?" "This." Jack gestured between them. Helping me with my book. Giving me this job. You must have hundreds of manuscripts cross your desk from professional authors. And dozens of candidates more qualified than me. Something flickered across her face, vulnerability, perhaps, though it disappeared so quickly Jack thought he might have imagined it. Your work spoke to me, she said simply. Both your editing sample and your manuscript. There's more to it than that, Jack pressed, surprising himself with his boldness. In the weeks they'd worked together, he'd begun to see beneath Elise's polished exterior. The way she sometimes stared out the window when she thought no one was looking. The sadness that occasionally shadowed her eyes. You're overstepping, Mr. Bennett, she said, her tone cooling. Jack, he corrected. If we're going to work together on my book, you should probably call me Jack. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Fine. Jack. And you're still overstepping. It's what makes me a good editor, he replied with a grin. Finding the story beneath the story. For a moment, they just looked at each other, something electric and unspoken passing between them. Then Emma burst into the office, returning from the children's corner of the company library where the receptionist had been watching her. Daddy. Miss Elise. I drew you both. She thrust a crayon drawing toward them, 3 stick figures holding hands, the tallest labeled Daddy, the middle one Miss Elise, and the smallest, me. Jack watched as Elise accepted the drawing, her fingers trembling slightly. Thank you, Emma, she said softly. It's beautiful. Later that evening, as they walked to the parking garage, Emma skipping ahead, Elise suddenly said, I had a daughter. Jack stopped walking. Had? Elise kept her eyes forward. Leukemia. She was 7. Your book, the way you wrote about magic hiding in ordinary things, about finding wonder even in the hardest times, it was how I used to talk to Sophie during her treatments. Her voice remained steady, but Jack could see the cost of that control in the tension of her shoulders. I'm so sorry, he said, the words inadequate but sincere. It was 5 years ago. She glanced at Emma, who was spinning in circles beneath a streetlight. She would have been Emma's age now. Jack wanted to reach for her hand but didn't dare. Instead, he said, Is that why you came to my house that morning? Because of the book? Elise finally looked at him, her blue eyes bright with unshed tears. I came to your house because you forgot your portfolio. I stayed because I found something I thought was lost forever. The launch party for Everyday Magic was held 6 months later in Meridian's elegant rooftop garden. Jack still felt out of place among the literary elite of New York, but Emma was in her element, charming everyone in her new party dress as she proudly pointed to her name in the dedication, for Emma, who taught me to see magic everywhere. Your daughter is remarkable, said a voice behind him. Jack turned to find Elise, stunning in a midnight blue gown, her hair loose around her shoulders for once. She gets that from her mother, Jack said automatically, then winced. Sorry. Old habit. Elise raised an eyebrow. You still do that? Give her credit after she abandoned you both? Some patterns are hard to break, Jack admitted. Well, break this one, Elise said firmly. Emma is remarkable because of you. Because you've raised her to be resilient and imaginative and kind, despite everything. Their eyes met, and Jack felt that now familiar current between them. Over the months of working together, their relationship had evolved from strictly professional to something more complex. Friendship, certainly. But also something else, something neither of them had acknowledged. Dance with me, Elise said suddenly. Here? Now? In front of everyone? Jack gestured to the room full of publishing executives and literary figures. Scared, Bennett? She challenged, her eyes sparkling. Terrified, he admitted with a laugh. But when has that ever stopped me? As they moved together on the dance floor, Jack finally asked the question that had been on his mind for months. "Why did you really come to my door that morning, Elise?" "The truth." She was quiet for a moment, her cheek against his shoulder. "I told you. You forgot your portfolio. You could have mailed it. Or had an assistant return it. Or waited until Monday." Elise pulled back slightly to look at him. "Fine. The truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about you after the interview. Not just professionally. There was something about you, your dedication to Emma, the way you spoke about stories mattering, how you didn't try to impress me or tell me what I wanted to hear." She took a deep breath. "I used the portfolio as an excuse. I wanted to see you again, outside the office. To see if what I felt was real." "And was it?" Jack asked, his heart pounding. Before she could answer, a commotion erupted across the room. Emma had climbed onto a chair and was addressing the crowd with all the confidence of a seasoned public speaker. "Excuse me. Excuse me, everyone. I have an announcement." The room quieted as people turned toward her, amused. "My daddy and Miss Elise love each other, but they're too scared to say it. So I'm saying it for them." The room erupted in laughter and applause. Jack felt his face burning as he looked at Elise, expecting embarrassment or anger. Instead, he found her laughing, her eyes bright with something that looked remarkably like joy. "Well," she said, raising an eyebrow. "Is my 5-year-old PR director correct?" Jack took a deep breath. "She is about you." "I don't know if she's right about you." Elisa's smile softened. "She's right about both of us, Jack. I've been fighting it because I was afraid of caring that much again, afraid of what might happen. But Emma reminded me of something important." "What's that?" "That magic is everywhere, if you're brave enough to see it." Elise reached up and touched his face. Even at 6:30 on a Saturday morning, standing on a stranger's doorstep, holding a forgotten portfolio. As their lips met, the room around them faded away. Neither of them noticed Emma's triumphant grin or the photographer capturing the moment for the publishing company's newsletter. All they knew was that sometimes, the things we forget lead us to exactly what we need to remember. 1 year later, Jack stood in the doorway of Emma's bedroom, watching as Elise read their daughter the final chapter of a new bedtime story, one they'd written together. Emma was officially Elise's stepdaughter now, though she'd started calling Elise Mom months before the wedding. "And they lived happily ever after?" Emma asked sleepily as Elise closed the book. "They lived truthfully ever after," Elise corrected gently. "With good days and hard days and all the days in between. But always together." "That's better than happily," Emma decided, snuggling deeper under her covers. Later, as they sat on the porch swing of their new home, a compromise between Jack's modest house and Elisa's luxury apartment, Jack took his wife's hand. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I hadn't forgotten that portfolio?" he asked. Elise smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I don't think it was an accident. Some things are meant to be forgotten so they can be found again in exactly the right way." "That's surprisingly romantic coming from the woman once known as the Ice Queen of Publishing," Jack teased. "What can I say? You've been a terrible influence on me," she replied, her eyes dancing with the playful spark he'd come to love. As the stars appeared above them, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here, from that early morning knock to this peaceful evening. From strangers to coworkers to family. From broken pieces to a beautiful whole. Sometimes the things we lose aren't really lost at all. Sometimes they're just waiting to be found in unexpected places, by unexpected people, at exactly the right time. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming content that reminds us all of the magic hiding in everyday life. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below.